Hello, I'm Aresevé, and welcome to Major Dreams, Minor Thoughts, an audio diary that documents and covers topics related to music history, the history of music industry, and the historical context and politics surrounding the genres and music consumed by the masses. This entry focuses on the history of Blackface Minstrelsy, how African Americans co-opted and destroyed the industry, and how minstrelsy shaped modern music. The practice of minstrelsy was an egregious form of racism and class-based exploitation. Blackface minstrelsy is often overlooked at best and ignored at worst in American history. It is often presented in a way that is accusatory and detrimental to the well-being of Black Americans. American society at large often is unable to address and contextualize that these acts were just another day in the long list of violence routinely being acted out against African Americans. Black people did not create blackface or minstrelsy, but they are often made to feel ashamed of the dissemination in looming history. This act imparts a great personal shame on individuals of the communities affected. Why are Black Americans, if they are made aware of this history, only made aware of the shameful and traumatic parts of U.S. history, while omitting how Black Americans dismantled these systems of oppression and exploitation? Part 1. Mockery and Painted Exploitation. The creation of Blackface Minstrelsy. Minstrelsy is defined as an American theatrical form, popular from the early 19th to early 20th century. It was founded as a comical enactment of racial stereotypes targeting enslaved and freed Black Americans. White male minstrels would do blackface and perform caricatured singing and dancing of enslaved Black Americans. Originally a professional theater production that developed into a vehicle for amateurs. The earliest minstrel shows were staged by white male minstrels. The word minstrel refers to someone who is a traveling musician. These minstrels would paint their faces black and perform caricatured and highly racialized song and dances of enslaved African Americans' lives on plantations. Blackface minstrelsy is often classified as a subgenre of minstrelsy, but they are often used interchangeably due to the reputation minstrelsy gained because of blackface. Thomas Dartmouth Rice, popularly known as Jim Crow, is cited as being the father of Blackface Minstrel Show. Blackface minstrel shows and characters like Jim Crow were widely loved by American public. This form of entertainment presented Black Americans as being inherently stupid, comical, and frivolous, solidifying what white Americans had believed Black Americans to be all along. In their mockery of Black Americans, they didn't realize the exploitation that would come from their system of othering. During this time, unionization and the restlessness of the impoverished white American middle class were growing. Many white Americans did not believe they were receiving the opportunity and access to wealth they were promised or owed. With this rising attitude came the ability to sympathize with enslaved Black people. This led to an increased support for the abolition of slavery and the growing workers' rights movement. With the introduction of Black minstrel shows, there was a cultural codification of whiteness and the other. The audiences who enjoyed minstrelsy comprised largely of low to middle working class white males. They responded vocally to the syncopated pre-rock and roll sounds that were displayed on minstrel stages. Sounds that were stolen, of course, from field hollers and Black Americans they were mocking. White America resonated with the racial and classist components that would establish the idea of a collective white culture. White America marveled in the newfound fun and enjoyment they found from the othering and denigration of Black Americans. Blackface minstrelsy distracted from the economic and class warfare and painted Black Americans as the primary threat to their prosperity. With this came rising indifference or outright rejection of the abolition of slavery. Minstrel shows played a crucial role in solidifying Black Americans as being something evolutionarily inferior, codifying the assumption that Black Americans were second-class citizens not because of anything that was actively being inflicted upon them, but because it was simply the natural order. This was the same line of reasoning that helped justify Manifest Destiny in the genocide of indigenous Americans. White America got to don their idea of what it meant to be Black and reap the enjoyment and rewards from it, while Black Americans had their rights and humanity to lose in response. Poor white Americans were being squeezed politically, economically, and socially by those in power, but also by each other. In response, they were given a communal identity and a clear, discernible enemy to rally against and blame all of their problems and shortcomings on. This collective identity gave them direction to focus their grievances surrounding their feelings of exploitation on a vulnerable population who they know had no means of fighting back against their terror. With this newfound enemy, there would be a loss of autonomy and agency in addressing the economic and social exploitation they were experiencing. By the 1900s, minstrel shows began to suffer due to the competition from vaudeville, movies, and radio. Vaudeville was a form of stage entertainment consisting of various acts, such as singing, acting, comedians, and even performing animals. With this competition came changing cultural taste in entertainment. Many minstrel shows had begun phasing out blackface in favor of the more highly favored female dance troupes, like the Ziegfeld Follies, a group of female singers, showgirls, comedians, and dancers. As the popularity of minstrel faded, the obscurity and racial violence of the performance persisted even stronger. Minstrel shows would later go on to incorporate transphobia into the theme of their shows, beginning as early as 1843 in Dan Emmett's troupe. A white male comedian donned blackface, a gown, and a black wig to originate the wench character, which epitomized the tropes of black women being either the hypersexual whore or the motherly Madonna. While singing songs, the performer would dance around the stage, flirting with everyone. With these archetypes also came the progenitors of the colorist tropes that still haunt African Americans in the modern era. The black-faced, trans-appearing individual would adopt one of the two distinct roles: the cold black mammy, a grotesquely disfigured, comically dressed woman with huge feet, and her counterpart, the light-skinned octoroon or yellow gal. This lighter counterpart was portrayed as being beautiful and desirable, and was often the object of desire and lust. These highly racialized enactments of Black Americans were and are often downplayed in their harm and mischaracterization of Black Americans. Minstrelsy and blackface were fundamental in establishing tropes that served to harm not only Black people, but Black women in particular. These archetypes of mammy and hypersexual siren allowed the creation of a culture of blame, to be placed solely on Black women whenever they would become victims of sexual assault or violence. Minstrel shows bore the right to pass off the harm and damage they were doing to Black Americans as light fun and humor, while simultaneously upholding the systems of oppression and sexual violence of Black people globally. Part 2. Subverting the Show. How Black Artists Destroyed Minstrelsy. Whenever blackface minstrelsy is addressed in history, it is often framed as the Great Black Dishonor, with it being widely overlooked how Black Americans not only invaded minstrelsy, but would be its undoing. In white America's mockery of African Americans and their hardship, there was a cultural exchange and introduction of Black culture taking place, even if it was highly racialized and exaggerated. White performers in their racism of bigotry inadvertently created the launchpad for Black Americans to enter into show business. Black performers used blackface minstrelsy as a way to gain notoriety and fame. Many Black pioneers of entertainment would take on the mantle of blackface minstrel performers. Black performers would often have to make a living acting out harmful, racially charged stereotypes directed at and about them. Examples include Two Real Coons, played by Burt Williams and George Walker. Many early jazz performers and pioneers such as Cab Calloway and Louis Armstrong resorted to minstrelsy to make a living. Black artists would adopt the caricatured versions of their songs and dances as well as the costumes that came with minstrelsy. These costumes included looks like Ethiopian delineators who wore wigs that were mops of unruly curls, wild and woolly. They were dressed in tattered stage clothes they would often borrow or take from Black people in the community. Following the end of the Civil War, resulting in the North's victory, it outlawed chattel slavery. Major white producers began to organize black minstrel troupes, and the white audiences soon began favoring the black troupes. A degenerative and racist genre that made a mockery of the dancing and singing style of black Americans was now being taken by the targets of ridicule. Black minstrel troupes were judged as being more authentic than the white troupes. The black troupes still had to play the same overly racialized characters, but white audiences preferred them. Minstrelsy had become a well-structured circus with well-established archetypes. Black people who were struggling to find work and jobs following the abolition of slavery, despite the shame of blackface minstrelsy, they were pleased to get steady work and to travel the country. But this joy was offset by the burnt cork wigs, clothing, and highly curated mannerisms that hid their talent and distinguished them as being no different than performing clowns known as commedia dell'arte. There was also a growing wave of black performers who didn't take any shame in the racially charged portrayal of their communities, with some black minstrels going as far as to stress their race, claiming to be ordinary ex-slaves doing what came naturally, rather than skilled entertainers acting out white-created stereotypes of black Americans. By the 1870s, black minstrels had become the acknowledged experts in plantation material. Critics would eventually turn on white minstrels, going on record to call them at best a base imitator. Acting the Negro is what was expected of black performers. Black minstrelsy created genuine stars like Billy Curzan, a comedian whose facial muscles were so malleable that he could hold a cup and saucer in his mouth. James Bland, a Howard-educated performer and songwriter, wrote several standard minstrel songs, an area that was typically dominated by white melodists like Stephen Foster. Black Americans had simultaneously been the racialized inspiration of minstrelsy's creation and its destruction, laying the groundwork for what would later become known as the great American classical music that is jazz. Part 3. Syncopated Roots. How minstrel shows set the stage for jazz. Jazz made its introduction to popular culture when minstrel shows were on their last leg. Blackface minstrelsy established a culture of exaggerated racial indifference by introducing black rhythm, culture, and dance styles. While being highly racialized and exaggerated, blackface minstrelsy still served the purpose of familiarizing white audiences with black culture. Despite the popularity surge of the blues and jazz music, the minstrel racial stereotypes lingered. Many radio comics would use the black voice dialect to keep a new generation of radio listeners laughing at minstrel stereotypes. Through the 1950s, film actors such as Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, Bing Crosby, and Joan Crawford were occasionally asked to put on cork. By this point, minstrelsy had become the show business standard. The most detrimental aspect of this co-opting and rebranding was the attitudes that followed. Minstrelsy trained white audiences to expect all black entertainers to perform hyper-racialized stereotypes. Black entertainers, whether they did minstrelsy or not, became indistinguishable. Black entertainers were expected to enact characteristics of the performing Negro fool. The legendary king of jazz, Louis Armstrong, mugged his way through the 1930s one-reelers. A one-reeler is a film that was contained on a single projector reel. These were short films that ranged from 10 to 12 minutes in length. Armstrong performed the minstrel song Shine in Heaven, wearing a leopard skin and standing ankle-deep in soap bubbles. Many black artists who gained their start in minstrelsy would go on to experience major criticism by modern-day standards. Many black revolutionaries and abolitionists considered these artists to be traitors to the advancement of their people and the black cause, while failing to acknowledge or understand the racial context of the period and the time that inspired their actions. Many black people who had innate affinity for music had no other way of supporting themselves. Going back to as early as the 19th century, many black people were illiterate and lacked any formal education in a trade. Many newly freed black people only knew the manual labor of slavery and field songs. Many black performers thought it was necessary for them to be on the stage, saying that they felt the white entertainers had complete control of the black narrative through their performances. Many black performers who participated in minstrelsy said that they thought it was their duty and calling to take control of the narrative and messages being disseminated about black Americans. Despite the ridicule and dehumanizing antics of blackface minstrelsy, many black entertainers who got their rise through blackface minstrelsy believed there was some acceptance to be gained through their participation in minstrelsy. While performers were ridiculed, they felt there was some acceptance, at least on the stage. When black entertainers were performing the same acts as the white performers, they needed to do it on stage. They felt that if they didn't perform and control the narrative, black people wouldn't be allowed to entertain at all. Black entertainers took on a demeaning and baseless mantle of performing black minstrelsy, and over time, they gradually made modifications and changes to minstrelsy. Eventually, these performers got to a place where they didn't need costumes or caricatures to perform, getting to a place where the black American presence in entertainment was something natural and highly beloved. This destroyed the need for minstrelsy and its structure in entertainment. This eventually led to the destruction of minstrelsy and the structures in entertainment. Part 4. The Afterimage. How Minstrelsy Still Shapes Culture. The history and racial violence of blackface minstrelsy is often understated. The history of blackface minstrelsy is either completely overlooked or buried, or when it is taught, there is a major emphasis on the shameful and demeaning nature of minstrelsy, with no reference or acknowledgement of how black Americans destroyed blackface minstrelsy. White audiences and history often frame blackface minstrelsy as a harmless form of entertainment. Minstrelsy is often credited with having provided an outlet to lower to middle class white audiences to vent their frustration about their own exploitation. Lower class white individuals from all walks of life could identify with some of the conditions that enslaved people worked, going on to later coin the term wage slaves. White performers embodying and exaggerating the dances and songs of black people provided them relief from their suffering. White performers and audiences used black people as a costume to vent their frustration against society, without facing repercussions because of the comedic nature of minstrelsy. They did this simultaneously while ignoring the suffering of the people they used as their costumes. The reason blackface minstrelsy was able to become a pillar of American society was because of the already normalized belief about enslaved Africans. Minstrel show's message was that black people belonged only on southern plantations and had no place in the north, with many racialized characters expressing the quote, "This being free," complained one minstrel character who'd run away from the plantation, "is worse than being a slave," end quote. Black American identity was used as a form of escapism to vent the frustrations felt from American exploitation and capitalism. In this escapism came the collective othering of black people and their woes, a theme that black people collectively enjoyed being enslaved and were better off for it. It was pervasive and all-encompassing. In that came the collective cognitive dissonance practiced by white society as a whole. For reference, cognitive dissonance is defined as a state of mental discomfort that occurs when a person holds beliefs or opinions that are inconsistent or that conflict with an aspect of their behavior. White American audiences never felt more joy and freedom than in their performances of their idea of blackness. In this adoption of highly racialized ideas of blackness came the attitudes that surrounded violence against the group from which they derived their communal joy. White audiences were able to steal and profit from the culture of the other, while relying on their white privilege and social standing in America, to never engage with their crimes and the lasting implications of what they deemed lighthearted fun. If black Americans were the other, and therefore inherently beneath them, they would not have to address the real-world implications that came with acting out violence against people who were not that different from them. To acknowledge the harm they were inflicting would be to admit the violence they inflicted against themselves, a theme that had been largely explored and talked about by the legendary James Baldwin. Blackface minstrelsy set the stage for many of the stereotypes that still plague and affect black Americans in modern society. These shows solidified the idea and concepts that black people were not multifaceted and complex people, but that Black Americans were simply characters of a blank canvas to be filled in. Thank you for tuning in to Journal Entry Number 2 on the history of Blackface Minstrelsy. Until next time, have a good one. Sincerely, Aresevé.